Would you give up everything for the people you love, even if it meant you'd never enjoy the outcome? This is the story of a mother who made that choice. In the quiet village of Amaka, tucked between two large hills and a dying river, there lived a widow named Motherhood. No one called her by her real name anymore. Her husband had died so long ago that even the children in the village only knew her as that poor widow with the two boys. Her sons, Jude and James, were born on a rainy morning, just 10 minutes apart. The villagers used to say they were a gift from the heavens. Their father, Elle, had danced with joy the day they were born, declaring, "Even if I die today, my name will live on through these boys." 3 years later, he did die. A strange sickness caught him in the middle of planting season. One week he was digging the ground with energy, the next he was lying on a bamboo mat, coughing blood. No one had money for a doctor. By the time help came, it was too late. After the funeral, Motherhood expected the family members to stay with her. But instead, they chased her away. "We warned you not to marry him," her late husband's sister had said. "Now go and carry your bad luck somewhere else." She packed what was left, 2 wrappers, a small cooking pot, and her babies, and moved into a forgotten corner of the village. Someone allowed her to stay in an abandoned mud house with no door, no windows, and no future. She turned it into a home. Motherhood did everything to keep her boys alive. She roasted corn by the roadside. She washed clothes for richer women. She walked long distances to fetch firewood and carry it on her head to the market. All for a few coins that barely bought Gary. But she never gave up. Every evening, after bathing the boys and giving them their only meal of the day, she would sit on the cold floor and whisper, "You will not die in this suffering. Even if it means I carry the load of the whole world, Jude. James, you will rise." Jude and James grew up strong. Their bones were sharp from hunger. Their skin was dark from the sun. But their hearts were kind. Jude was the elder twin by 10 minutes. Quiet, thoughtful, always calculating in his mind how to make tomorrow better. James was the talkative one. Always laughing even when the pot was empty. He would tell jokes just to make Mama smile. They never asked for more than what she gave. Even when other children mocked them for their torn clothes and bare feet, they stayed close to each other and to their mother. By the time Jude finished secondary school, he was 18. He passed with flying colors. The whole village was shocked. "That poor boy," someone had whispered. "How did he even pay for his WAEC?" The answer was simple. His mother had sold her last wrapper. She now wore only one faded gown every day, patched at the shoulders, threadbare at the neck. But she didn't care. Her son had made it. The real problem came next. Jude got admission to the Polytechnic in the city. And there was no money to go. They sat around the cooking pot that night. It was empty, no food inside, just ash and silence. "Mama, I can stay back," Jude said. "Let me look for something to do. Maybe work for a year and save up." "No," James interrupted, "we'll both work. We'll carry blocks. We'll clean shops. You'll go to school next year, I swear." Motherhood smiled, but inside, her heart was tearing. "I didn't raise you boys to carry blocks forever," she whispered. "There must be more to life." But more never came. The next year came and Jude didn't go to school. The next year after that, same thing. Even James stopped schooling after junior secondary. He started helping at construction sites and sleeping in pain from lifting too much. It was a dry Tuesday morning. There was no food in the house. No soap. No money. Nothing. Jude said he would go to the edge of the village, where a house was being built but abandoned. He had heard some carpenters left wooden planks behind. "If I carry just 3 planks," he told James, "we can sell them to that coffin maker at the market. He'll give us small money." James nodded. "Be careful. That was the last time Jude smiled that day. He got there and began picking planks, old ones, cracked ones. But someone had been watching him. Thief! Thief! A voice shouted. A crowd gathered. A tire appeared. Someone poured petrol. Jude screamed, "Please, I'm not a thief. I just wanted to help my mother, please." But angry people don't listen. Just as someone was about to strike a match, a woman rushed in and screamed, "Stop! I know him. That boy is not a thief." It was Obianuju, the teacher who once lived in the village. She had returned that week to bury her mother. She stood between Jude and the crowd. They backed down slowly. But the damage had been done. Jude was beaten, his eyes swollen. He walked home in pain, his shirt stained with blood. When Mama Jude saw him, she fell on the floor and wailed. Her neighbors came. They stood in silence. No one said a word. That night, when the boys were asleep, she stepped outside, barefoot. She looked up at the sky and cried quietly, "God, who will help me? What haven't I done? I have carried shame, pain, hunger. I have given everything. But still, my children suffer. What kind of life is this?" After the beating incident, things went from bad to worse. Jude could barely move for days. His eyes were still red and swollen. His ribs ached. James, who used to smile even during hunger, now sat in silence most of the time. And Mama Jude, she had changed. She no longer told bedtime stories. She no longer sang while sweeping the compound. She only stared into space, thinking. As if she was talking to someone that only her eyes could see. She began avoiding the women in the village square. She would walk past them when they laughed or gossiped. She no longer begged anyone for food. Even when James offered to go and ask for help from one of the elders, she said, "No. We've asked enough. Let them see how we survive." But every night, she wept. She waited until the boys had closed their eyes. Then she would sit by the fire, holding the ashes of an empty pot, whispering, "Even if I have to give my life, let my children live better than this." One night, she had a dream. She was walking through a forest, barefoot, wounded, crying, and a voice said, "Go to the woman by the river. The one people fear but never approach. She knows what to do." She woke up sweating. She didn't say a word. In a meek village, everyone had heard of the woman by the river. Some said she was a woman feared by all. Some said she was a wicked woman that had refused to die. Others believed she was once a powerful herbalist who now lived far from the village because her powers scared people. But what they all agreed on was this. People who went to her didn't come back the same. A man once went to ask for wealth. Months later, he built a big house. But his wife died during childbirth and none of his children lived past age 5. Another woman went there for her daughter to pass WAEC. The girl passed, traveled abroad, but was never heard from again. So people avoided her. But Mama Jude had no more fear left in her. Early one morning, before the sun had fully risen, she packed nothing but a black wrapper and her scarf. She left a note for Jude and James. "I went to look for hope. Don't worry." She walked for over an hour, past the farmlands, past the old shrine, and finally stood by the riverbank where the water flowed slowly like it was also tired of life. There, under a twisted tree with long black roots, sat the woman. She was old, maybe 100. Her skin was ashy like burnt wood. Her eyes sharp like someone who could see beyond the bones. She didn't look surprised to see Mama Jude. "You came late," the woman said. "But not too late." Mama fell on her knees. "Please, I need help. I have tried. I have given everything. My sons are suffering. I will do anything. Anything." The woman stood slowly and picked up a long staff. "Your sons will be rich," she said calmly. They will rise above this village. Their names will be known in cities and faraway lands. They will wear clothes your hands never touched, and eat food your tongue never tasted. But, she added, you must pay the price. What price? Mama Jude asked, shaking. The woman walked to the river, dipped her hand, and brought out a red calabash. She held it up and said, you will not enjoy their wealth. Not even 1 naira. Not a grain of rice. Not a drop of oil. Not a wrapper. Not a handshake from success. Instead, you will be poor forever. You will beg on the street. You will eat from garbage. You will wear rags. If you touch their wealth even once, everything will vanish. And they will return to worse poverty than now. Mama Jude's heart jumped. She opened her mouth but said nothing. The woman leaned closer. So, what do you choose? Mama Jude couldn't answer. She turned and walked back home. That evening, she sat with her sons as they ate roasted yam James had begged from a generous neighbor. They didn't ask where she went. She didn't speak. She only looked at their faces. Jude's lips had started healing. James was laughing again. And yet, they were still poor. Still sleeping on torn mats, still waking up with empty stomachs. That night, Mama Jude lay awake, staring at the stars. She remembered holding them as babies. She remembered their father saying, even if I die, let these boys rise. She remembered the beating, the hunger, the humiliation. She sat up, picked a scarf, and walked into the dark night. This time, she didn't leave a note. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds didn't sing. Mama Jude walked slowly back to the river, her old slippers cutting into her heels, but she didn't feel the pain. Her mind was already made up. She had cried all her tears. Her eyes were dry. Her heart, steady. The old woman was already waiting, sitting by the same tree, as if she knew she would return. Mama stood there. No greetings. No questions. She simply said, I'm ready. The woman nodded. Slowly. As if this was the answer she'd been waiting years to hear. Then speak it, the woman said. Mama Jude took a deep breath. She looked up to the sky once, then spoke clearly. From today on, I choose to remain poor. I choose to eat from garbage. I choose to sleep in rags. I choose to never touch my children's money. I choose to suffer, so that they will not suffer. The woman handed her a black thread, tied around a small stone. Keep this with you, she said. As long as you don't break your word, they will prosper. But if you ever, even by mistake, eat from what belongs to them, all will be lost. Mama Jude took the stone. She nodded once. And walked away. Life didn't change overnight. There was no magic. No sudden miracle. But small things began to happen. James got a small job with a man from another town who came to build a new market. He worked hard, earned little, but learned quickly. Soon, the man took him along to the city. Jude also left weeks later after getting a bricklaying job that led to him learning tiling. He followed a contractor to Owari and began sending small money home. Mama Jude was happy not because of the money but because her sons were becoming men. Step by step, struggle by struggle. They kept in touch. Every Sunday, they called. They didn't earn much yet, but they sent clothes. Foodstuff. Soap. Little things. Mama always found ways to pass them on to others in need. She never touched them. Not one grain. Not one wrapper. Not even salt. 2 years passed. Then, one weekend, they came back together. James in a new shirt. Jude with a brand new phone. Smiling. Tall. Well-fed. Young men that turned heads as they entered the village. Mama Jude was outside sweeping when they arrived. She screamed when she saw them and ran to hug them both, laughing, crying, touching their faces like they were newborn babies again. James held out a white envelope. "Mama, we came to take you with us. No more suffering. We rented a place. We brought money. Look." But Mama stepped back. She forced a smile. Then said the words that shocked both boys. "I'm not going anywhere." They looked at each other, confused. "Mama, this is what we've been working for," Jude said. "We promised. You remember? We said we would come back for you. And you have," she said gently. "You kept your word. But let me keep mine." They begged. They pleaded. She only smiled. "I'm happy here," she lied. "This old place, it's enough for me." "Mama, please," James whispered. "Let us feed you. Just one plate. Even if you don't come with us." But Mama walked inside the house. She didn't look back. That night, she cried quietly on her mat while Jude and James sat outside, not knowing what they had done wrong. Every time they visited, she smiled, laughed, asked questions. But any time they brought her gifts, she would either redirect them to neighbors or say she wasn't hungry. She still fetched water from the stream. She still patched her only wrapper. She still bent over to pick firewood. And every night, she touched the stone in her pocket and whispered, "Let them rise. Even if I stay down." It had been nearly 5 years since James and Jude left a meek village. Now they were not just doing well, they were known. James was running a small logistics business in Enugu. Jude had become a successful tiler and interior decorator, always on the move from one big client to another. They had built a 2-bedroom flat for Mama in the village, but she never slept in it. She still preferred her old leaking hut. They sent money, brought food, offered to pay for everything. And Mama Jude? She accepted nothing. At first, they thought it was just village stubbornness. But as the years went on, they began to worry. One December, James returned with Jude. This time, they didn't come to visit for 2 days. They came to take her. They had already prepared her room in the city, bought her new wrappers, gold earrings, a soft bed, a flat-screen TV, and even a fridge with her favorite brand of ogbono soup already cooked. When they arrived in the village and told her again, she shook her head slowly. "My children. I'm too old for city warala. I'm okay here. The air is better. I don't want noise and light and traffic." Jude stood up and paced. "Mama, please. What's really the problem? We're not strangers. We're your sons. Let us take care of you. Let us spoil you. That's all we want." She smiled softly and looked away. James knelt before her and began crying. "Mama, don't punish us like this. We made it because of you. Every day we worked in pain so that one day we could give you a better life. Let us do it. Don't break our hearts." When she didn't answer, they called neighbors. One by one, old women came and pleaded. Even the village elders joined. "This is the fruit of your labor," one elder said. "Don't spit it out." With nothing else to say, and her sons weeping like children, Mama finally gave a slow nod. "Let me pack my things." They cheered. Jude hugged her tight. James wiped his face, grinning. She only looked at the ground, silently. She hadn't been in a car for over 10 years. The movement made her sick. But when they entered Enugu and she saw the house, her legs almost failed her. Cream-colored walls, clean tiled floor, curtains that danced with the fan, pictures of her boys on the wall, her own picture, enlarged, in the hallway. She put her hand over her mouth and whispered, "Jesus." They helped her sit, showed her around, played her favorite Igbo songs. She smiled, genuinely this time. "So this is where my sons live?" she asked softly. "Yes," Jude said proudly. "And this is your home now too." Later that evening, They served her food. Hot soup with goat meat, pounded yam soft like cloud, and chilled malt. She tried to resist. "I'm not hungry," she said. But James begged. "Mama, just small. Eat with us." She looked at their hopeful eyes. She had no more excuses left. Slowly, she dipped her hand in the bowl, tore a small lump, dipped it in soup, put it in her mouth. The taste filled her mouth like nothing she had ever known. For a moment, it felt like heaven. And then, the stone in her pocket burned. At first, it was perfect. Mama had finally agreed to stay in the city. For the first 2 days, it was joy overflowing. Jude and James took turns attending to her, warming her bath water, showing her how to use the remote, massaging her tired legs at night. They cooked her best meals, brought a tailor to sew new wrappers, took her to a clinic for checkup, and for the first time in many years, she smiled without holding back. "Mama, this is just the beginning," James said. "We'll build you a mansion, buy you a car. We'll take you to Abuja, even London," Jude added. She nodded, quietly. But inside her heart, the stone she kept in her pocket had begun to feel heavier. It no longer just stayed warm, now it pulsed. She ignored it. It started with a phone call. Jude's voice dropped on the phone while speaking to a client. "What do you mean the project is cancelled?" The client simply said, "They've chosen another Tyler. Someone else offered a better deal." Sorry. He didn't panic at first. But then the next client said the same thing. And the next. His calendar, once full of bookings, suddenly became empty. Meanwhile, James received a call from one of his drivers. "Ogre, 2 bikes are missing. One customer hasn't returned since yesterday. We can't find him." Then came a message from his account officer. "Dear Mr. James, we noticed an unusual withdrawal of 1,200,000 Nigerian nairas from your account. Please confirm." He panicked. Checked. Gone. Within hours, both brothers began losing grip of the lives they had worked so hard to build. They tried to act normal. Smiled around Mama. But that evening, Jude sat on the couch, staring at the wall. James paced the room, whispering to himself. By the 4th day, Jude couldn't hide it anymore. He sat with Mama and said, "Mama, please, have you noticed anything strange since you came?" She kept quiet. "Things are changing. I don't know what's going on. My clients just dropped me for no reason." "Me too," James added, sitting beside her. "Money just vanished from my account. My business is shaking. I don't understand. It's like something is fighting us." Their eyes begged for understanding. Mama looked at them, these boys she had raised with suffering, with fasting, with firewood and Gary. And now, because of her weakness, the promise was breaking. She stood up slowly and said, "Don't worry. Maybe it's just a test." She walked to her room, locked the door, and cried into her wrapper. "Oh God. I couldn't even resist one swallow of food. One. Look at what I've done. My children, my poor children." That night, the stone in her wrapper cracked. It happened quietly, while the city still slept, while the birds had not begun to sing, while Jude and James still snored in their rooms, dreaming of how to fix their falling lives. Mama was gone. She had woken up before 5 a.m. No light, no sound, just a deep ache in her chest and a pounding guilt that refused to let her rest. She folded her wrapper gently, the same faded wrapper she had worn during the hardest days of her life. The one with the small tear by the side. The one she had washed, patched, and folded so many times it now carried the smell of home. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take the new clothes her sons bought. She didn't even take her slippers. She walked barefoot down the hallway, looked at the door to her son's rooms, and whispered like a prayer. Let them rise again, even if I must vanish. And then, she ran. Into the cold, early morning. Like a mad woman. Like someone who was escaping death or running toward it. By 8 a.m., Jude knocked on her door. Mama, wake up, breakfast is ready. Silence. He opened the door, empty. Window unlocked. Room bare. At first, they thought maybe she went outside to pray. Then maybe she went to stroll. By noon, worry turned to panic. They searched the estate. Called neighbors. Went to churches. Even visited police stations. No old woman like that has been brought here, the officers said. They printed flyers. Drove around markets. Begged anyone who had seen a slim, dark-skinned woman with tired eyes and no slippers. But no one had. Mama Jude had disappeared. In a crowded part of town, where the air stinks of smoke and gutters, where street children chase after moving buses, and tired women sit with begging bowls. She appeared. She didn't speak much. She just sat by the corner of a roundabout, begging. Anything, please. I'm hungry. When no one gave, she moved to the garbage bin behind a booker. Picked bones. Washed spoilt rice. Drank water from a leaking sachet someone had thrown away. She looked nothing like the proud mother who raised 2 boys with dignity and love. People passed her without knowing. And that was how she wanted it. Each night, as she lay on bare cement under a bridge, she would whisper, "Don't let them find me. Just let them live." After 5 days of tears and confusion, something strange began to happen. Jude got a surprise call from an old client. "We're re-awarding that contract. Come and start work Monday." James recovered part of the stolen money through his bank and got a new deal with an e-commerce company that needed same-day deliveries. New clients began calling. Business started picking up again. Their accounts, once draining fast, began to refill. They didn't understand it. But they were grateful. Still, none of it brought them joy. Because Mama was gone. They printed more posters. Spoke to radio stations. Drove to nearby towns. They even began walking the streets at night, hoping to find her in a corner, or under a bridge. But every time, they returned home alone. What they didn't know was that every time they passed close, Mama saw them. And hid. It had been 3 weeks since Mama Jude vanished. To Jude and James, the joy of success meant nothing anymore. Their businesses were bouncing back, money was flowing in again, and new contracts were on the table, but the dining table at home was always set with 1 extra plate no one touched. "She didn't even leave a note," Jude would say, shaking his head. "Maybe someone kidnapped her," James would whisper, though he knew it wasn't true. They still went out searching. Each day, after work, they split up. James drove through markets and street corners. Jude checked old people's homes, hospitals, even mortuaries. They never gave up. Not for a single day. One Sunday evening, James was on his way to a client's place near Coal Camp. The road was busy with traders returning home, women with basins on their heads, children chasing each other in the dust. As he slowed down at a roundabout near the old bus park, something caught his eye. An old woman in a faded wrapper was sitting at the corner of the roundabout with her head bowed, a black nylon bag by her feet. Something about her looked familiar. Too familiar. James parked quickly and jumped out of the car. But by the time he got there, she was gone. He looked around. Nothing. Just a few other beggars and street kids. His heart pounded. No, no, he told himself. It can't be. It can't be Mama. He stood there for nearly 10 minutes, scanning every face. Then slowly walked back to his car, eyes wet. That night, Mama Jude slept behind a closed provision stall. The woman who sold there let her stay as long as she cleaned the floor before morning. She never spoke to anyone. Never mentioned her name. She only picked leftover food, drank from dripping pipes, and slept with her wrapper tightly around her neck. Every night, she still touched the broken stone in her pocket. The one she had once sworn upon. "They are rising again," she whispered. "Don't let them find me." The following week, Jude came to distribute flyers in the same area. He walked the street with a few pictures of his mother printed in black and white. He passed Mama once. She had her back to him, bent low, picking leaves from a pile of garbage. He slowed. He felt something, but shook his head. "It's just another old woman." He walked past. Mama's hand froze in the garbage bin. Her back straightened slightly, but she didn't turn. She waited. Counted to 50. Then resumed picking. Her heart broke all over again. That night, one of the street kids who had seen James weeks ago told Mama, "A man day find one woman we resemble you. E don come here 2 times. Him be like person we day cry." Mama didn't answer. The girl tried again. "Mama, you no go meet him? If na you're peekin'." "No," Mama snapped softly. "It's not me." She turned her face to the wall. But inside, her heart was bleeding. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. James had gone to donate food to a small charity center on the outskirts of town. He wasn't thinking of his mother anymore, at least not at that moment. He was just trying to stay useful, to stay sane. But as he handed over cartons of noodles, a young girl tugged at his sleeve. "Ogre," she said, "I know you." James looked down, puzzled. "You come round about that time. Day find old woman we miss." His heart skipped. "Yes. Yes. Do you know her?" The girl nodded. "She day stay near our shop. She day beg for food there every night. She no day talk to anybody. But one day, she talk in her sleep, call you names. James and Jude." James nearly dropped the bag in his hand. "Can you take me there? Now?" That evening, James returned with Jude. And there she was. Mama. Sitting behind a broken kiosk, chewing something from a nylon bag. Her wrapper was dirtier than ever. Her face thinner. Her eyes empty. But when she looked up and saw them, she froze. For a moment, they all just stood there. No words. Just breathing. Then James shouted, "Mama!" They rushed to her. She tried to stand and run, but her legs failed her. She collapsed in their arms. And cried. "Why, Mama? Why did you do this?" Jude asked, holding her like a child. "We thought you were dead," James whispered. "I thought I killed your future," she said, in a voice that sounded like it had cracked from holding too many tears. They took her home. Bathed her. That night, she refused the bed. She refused food. She sat on the floor. Her son sat beside her, confused but relieved. Then she began to speak. Slowly. Softly. As though each word came from the center of her soul. "The day you brought me into this house, and I ate from your table, things began to fall apart. You thought it was ordinary. It wasn't." She touched the small broken stone in her wrapper and held it tightly. "Before you became rich, I went to the woman by the river. I begged her to help me. I said I didn't care what it would cost me as long as you would rise." James and Jude froze. She continued. "She told me the price. That I must remain poor forever. That I must never enjoy 1 naira of your wealth. That I must never eat from your pot or wear clothes from your money. And I agreed." Her voice broke. "But I was weak. I missed you. I missed joy. I wanted to hold you and feel the life I had prayed for. I stayed 2 days. I ate your food. I smiled." She began to shake. "Then I felt it, the punishment. I saw things falling apart. I ran, my sons. I ran because I could not watch your lives crumble. I ran because if I stayed, I would be your ruin. Jude was crying openly now. James had buried his face in his hands. Then Mama stood up suddenly. And now you've brought me back again. Her voice rose. You want me to eat. You want me to sleep in a bed I didn't earn. You want me to destroy you again. No. No. I won't do it. She threw off the wrapper. Ran to the door. Jude stood, tried to stop her, but she pushed past him, shouting. Let me beg. Let me eat from dust. Let me sleep with rats. But don't take this from me. Don't take your success. Let me suffer so you can rise. She ran into the street. Barefoot. Wild-eyed. Weeping. Like a mad woman chased by something only she could see. That night, Jude and James sat at the doorstep. Speechless. Broken. Confused. We didn't know, Jude whispered. She gave everything, James said. Everything. They didn't sleep. They didn't speak. They just Saturday. Listening to the sound of a city that had no answers for their pain. The day after Mima ran off again, Jude and James sat in silence for hours. No music. No food. No sleep. Just silence and a heavy question hanging in the air. If we take her back, we'll lose everything, Jude finally said. But if we don't, we'll lose her, James replied. It was a war neither of them wanted to fight. They had tasted both worlds now, the sweetness of wealth and the deeper sweetness of seeing their mother smile without hiding pain behind it. But they also saw what their joy did to her. It crushed her. It tore at her spirit. All because of a promise she had made when life gave her no choice. That night, they made their decision. It wasn't easy. They searched again. They found her behind an old market stall, holding a piece of dry bread in her hand and a cracked bottle of water. She didn't smile when she saw them. She looked afraid. But Jude knelt down. James followed. Mama, Jude said gently, we're not here to take you back. We're here to follow you. If you must suffer for us to rise, then we would rather fall than rise without you. Tears filled her eyes. She dropped the bread. And they hugged her, right there on the dirty ground, like children again. That evening, the three of them returned to a meek village. They didn't tell anyone why. They just went home. The boys unpacked the little they brought. They stayed with her. They cooked with firewood. Drew water from the stream. Slept on mats again. And for the first time in years, they ate as a family, not in wealth, but in peace. By the fifth day, the signs returned. Jude's bank account suddenly locked 4 unexplained irregularities. James lost 2 deliveries and a major investor pulled out without warning. Their phones stopped ringing. Their inboxes went quiet. They knew what it meant. The same pattern. Wealth was drying again like leaves under a burning sun. One evening, as the three of them sat under the mango tree, Mama finally broke the silence. You've seen it now, she said softly. It doesn't matter where we are. As long as I'm near your wealth, it will continue to fail. So what do we do? James asked, his voice thin with helplessness. She looked at them and said the hardest words. Take whatever is left. All of it. And throw it into the river. Mama, Jude gasped. No, James whispered, shaking his head. We can't. You must, she said. Because your true wealth is not in those coins. It's in your heart. And your hands. Start again, if you must. But let this cursed wealth go. The next morning, with heavy hearts, they gathered the remaining money they had, the last bundle of notes, savings, business cash, and wrapped it in a cloth. Together, they walked to the same river their mother had once visited. The water was calm. Still. Mama pointed. Let it go. They hesitated. But with one deep breath, Jude stepped forward, raised the bundle, and threw it into the water. The splash was small, but the silence that followed was loud, like the whole world had paused to listen. From that day, they returned fully to the village life. Their phones no longer buzzed. The city forgot them. Their wealth dried like yesterday's rain. But their mother was alive. And with them. And every night, though there was little to eat and nowhere soft to sleep, they sat around one lamp, together. The days that followed their return to poverty were the hardest yet. Jude and James had to start from the very beginning. No money. No connections. Just sweat, strength, and quiet determination. They fetched water for villagers. They cleared bush paths for old men. They repaired thatched roofs for a plate of yam or a few naira. Mama watched silently, often wiping silent tears. "My sons are back in the pit," she would whisper at night. But they're not alone. They stayed strong for her, for each other, for the promise they made not to chase riches and lose their soul. Years passed. Opportunities didn't fall from the sky. But with time, effort, and favor, they began to come. Jude was hired by a small contractor in a nearby town who discovered he had skill in tiling and design. Within months, his name started spreading again, not because of magic, but because of excellence. James started assisting an old delivery man with errands and logistics. He was loyal, punctual, and respectful. The man introduced him to others. Slowly, one bike turned to 2, then 3. Then a small team. They didn't chase riches this time. They chased value. And this time, it stayed. 7 years after they first threw their wealth into the river, they had rebuilt their lives. No, not with mansions or cars, but with peace. With steady income. Respect. Small businesses. Friends who trusted them. And joy that didn't feel borrowed. They returned to the city once again. This time, with their mother. "Mama," James said as he held her bag, "this time, we're not forcing you. We're inviting you to come eat at your own table." She looked at him. No stone burned in her pocket. No fear danced in her belly. Just warmth and release. She nodded slowly. "Let's go." It was a small apartment, nothing fancy. Just clean, quiet, and peaceful. A round table stood in the center, covered with a red and white cloth. In the middle sat a steaming bowl of jollof rice, goat meat, fried plantain, and cold malt drinks. Jude pulled out a chair. James opened the bottle. Mama stood still for a moment, just looking. "Mama," Jude said gently, "you can eat now." She didn't move. Tears filled her eyes. Her legs shook. Her hands trembled. James walked to her and whispered, "The curse is gone, Mama. You paid the price. And now, we're just a family again." She fell to her knees. They all dropped beside her. 2 grown men and an old mother, crying on a tiled floor. After a while, she looked up, smiled through tears, and said, "Let's eat, my children." They pulled their chairs. And that day, after many years of hunger, pain, and sacrifice, they ate together. Not in fear, but in freedom. And their story became a legend in a meek village about a mother who gave up everything, and still lived to taste the fruit of her love. Now that you've heard Mama Jude's story, I ask you again, would you give up everything for the people you love even if you never got to enjoy the reward? This story reminds us of something we often forget. Some mothers are eating from the dust so their children can eat at the table. Some mothers are walking barefoot so their children can arrive in cars. Some mothers are crying in secret so their children can laugh in public. Some are sleeping hungry so their children can grow strong. Some are carrying shame so their children can wear honor. And when it's finally time to enjoy the reward, some mothers quietly step aside, still praying, still protecting, still giving. So if your mother is still alive, please, Don't wait. Call her. Visit her. Send her something, no matter how small. Let her know she's not forgotten. And if this story touched your heart, do these 4 simple things. Like this video so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs this reminder. Comment below, just say thank you, Mama. And subscribe for more powerful stories that speak to real life. You're not just watching a video. You're remembering what truly matters. Thank you for watching. The end.